In 1872, a 32-year-old man named George Smith was sitting inside the British Museum, cleaning dirt from a broken piece of clay. Smith was not an archaeologist. He had left school at 14 and trained as a banknote engraver. But he had taught himself to read cuneiform, the wedge-shaped writing of ancient Mesopotamia, and the museum eventually hired him to sort thousands of tablets excavated from the ruins of Nineveh. Most of them were administrative records, taxes, grain, letters from officials who had been dead for 2,500 years. Then Smith found a story. A god warns a man that a flood is coming. The man builds a huge boat. He brings his family aboard, along with animals. The storm destroys the world. When the water begins to fall, he releases birds to search for dry land. Smith knew that story. Everyone in Victorian Britain knew that story. It was Noah's Ark, except the survivor was named Utnapishtim. The boat was built in Mesopotamia, and the words were pressed into clay in the library of an Assyrian king. According to a later account, Smith became so excited that he jumped up, ran around the room, and began taking off his clothes. Honestly, Victorian archaeology needed more moments like this. But the tablet had opened a very awkward door. Because once people started looking beyond the Bible, they found flood stories almost everywhere. So did all of them remember the same disaster? Was there really a day when the world drowned? Or are we asking the wrong question? The Mesopotamian version is already uncomfortably familiar. A divine warning. A sealed boat. Family, craftsmen, animals, seed. Then rain, darkness, and water. The boat comes to rest. Birds are sent out. The survivor leaves the vessel and offers a sacrifice. But Mesopotamia is only the beginning. In India, Manu is warned by a fish that a flood will destroy all life. He builds a boat and preserves the seeds of the world. In Greece, Deucalion and Pyrrha survive a flood inside a chest. Their vessel lands on a mountain, and they rebuild humanity from stones. In China, the story is different. There is no ark. The hero Yu does not escape the water. He spends years cutting channels and teaching the flood where to go. Controlling the water becomes the act that makes civilization possible. And around the coast of Australia, some Aboriginal traditions describe shorelines advancing, islands disappearing, and places that could once be reached on foot becoming separated by the sea. From far away, these stories look identical. Move closer, and they do not. Some floods are punishment. Some are accidents. Some heroes run. Some heroes stay and dig drainage canals. The stories may have borrowed from one another, changed over time, or grown independently beside dangerous rivers and coasts. Still, the skeleton keeps returning. Water rises. The old world disappears. A few people carry something through. Then life begins again. That pattern is strong enough to tempt us into one enormous conclusion. But before we make it, geology gets a vote. If one flood covered the entire planet during human history, it would not be shy. Floods sort sediment. They move boulders, bury forests, rearrange rivers, and leave chemical signatures. A recent global flood would produce a worldwide layer of the same age, interrupt ecosystems everywhere at once, and force nearly every land animal through the same population bottleneck. We do not find that layer. Yes, there are marine fossils on mountains. Mount Everest itself contains limestone made from an ancient seafloor. But that rock was lifted upward when India collided with Asia. The mountain moved. The ocean did not climb 9 kilometers and politely leave the rest of the geological record untouched. So the clean answer is no. The evidence does not support one recent flood covering the entire Earth. And that should be the end of the video. Except geology rejected one global flood, then showed us something much larger. The world did drown. It just took thousands of years. 21,000 years ago, so much water was locked inside ice sheets that global sea level was roughly 120 meters lower than it is today. That is not a slightly wider beach. It is the height of a 40-story building. Britain was not an island. You could walk from France into a vast plain now buried beneath the North Sea. The Persian Gulf was largely dry land, crossed by rivers, Southeast Asia was a single enormous region called Sundaland, joining much of what are now Malaysia, Sumatra, Java, and Borneo. Our familiar map is missing millions of square kilometers of habitable land. And this matters because humans love coasts. Rivers provide water. Estuaries provide fish. Flat coastal plains are easy to travel through. Some of the best places to live were also the first places the rising ocean erased. The rise was not always slow. Around 14,600 years ago, during an event called Meltwater Pulse 1A, global sea level rose somewhere around 10 to 20 meters in no more than 500 years. At the high end, that averages about 4 centimeters every year. 4 centimeters sounds harmless, but over one human lifetime, it is more than 3 meters of vertical rise. On a flat coastal plain, the shoreline could move kilometers. Your grandfather's hunting ground becomes your father's salt marsh. The tree you climbed as a child stands in the surf when you are old. Your grandchildren know the family burial place only as a patch of shallow water. This was not one giant wave. It was a siege, and it lasted longer than any human life. Then, sometimes, the wave did come. The lost plain between Britain and Europe is now called Doggerland. The name makes it sound imaginary. It was not. It had rivers, wetlands, forests, red deer, wild boar, and human families living beside the water. In 1931, a fishing trawler named Kalinda was working about 40 kilometers east of England. Its net pulled up a lump of black peat from the seafloor. Inside was a carefully carved, barbed point made from red deer antler, probably the tip of a spear or harpoon. Someone had stood there and made a weapon. Today, that place is under the North Sea. About 8,150 years ago, a vast section of seabed collapsed off Norway. The Storegga landslide generated a tsunami that struck coastlines around the North Sea. The dramatic version says this single wave destroyed Doggerland. The newer evidence is messier. Doggerland had already been shrinking for generations. Local geography created pockets of shelter, and the tsunami probably did not erase every remaining island in one afternoon. But imagine living on the wrong shore. Your family has watched the sea advance for generations. Then the water withdraws. Fish lie exposed on the mud. People walk forward to look. And the horizon stands up. For the survivors, scholars can argue about whether the flood was local. Their world was gone. This leaves one last problem. Could a story really survive for thousands of years? Researchers studying Aboriginal Australian traditions collected accounts of drowned land, vanished islands, and routes that once existed across places now covered by water. If those stories describe real shoreline changes, some may preserve information more than 7,000 years old, possibly much older. That claim deserves caution. A story is not a security camera. Details change. Meanings move. A later flood can merge with an older one. But that may be exactly why stories survive. A list of sea level measurements is easy to forget. A story about the day the ocean swallowed the road to an island is not. Oral tradition does not preserve the past like a photograph. It compresses it. 10 floods become one flood. Many frightened families become one survivor. Seeds become every living animal. A drowned valley becomes the whole world. Not because ancient people were stupid. Because that is how memory carries more than one lifetime can hold. Maybe the world's flood stories do not point backward to one event. Maybe they point to an era, thousands of years long, when coastlines moved, countries vanished, and every few generations somebody had to explain why the old path continued beneath the sea. So which flood was Noah's flood? I do not think anyone can honestly name it. Mesopotamia had catastrophic river floods. China had its own battles with the Yellow River. Coastal peoples watched post-Ice Age seas cover entire landscapes. Some stories traveled. Others probably began again, because water keeps doing the same terrible thing to people who build their homes beside it. But in 1931, the North Sea gave back one object. A piece of antler, shaped by a human hand, from a country no map remembers. The person who made it did not know they lived in a lost world. To them, it was simply home. They had no satellites, no written records, and no graph showing sea level rise. They only knew that the water had taken the path, then the trees, then the graves. What sentence could they give their children that was large enough to carry all of that? The whole world drowned. And from where they stood, it had